I'm really excited today to have Liane Davey joining me. Liane and I have known each other for several years now. She's an accomplished speaker, an author of multiple books, the latest being The Good Fight, all around having really positive conflict. It's actually a good thing, folks. And she's joining me today because, boy, if you want to get things done with other people, Liane is your go to girl. That's what she's all about. And we're going to talk today about we're seeing a lot of tension still with Amazon, with Walmart. We're seeing organizations still have mandates for people to go back to the office and be present as a representation of doing good work and correlating that with performance. And does it have to be that way? I tend to think there are more creative ways to get at what I call compassion infused compromise. And I think that's by negotiating team agreements. Now, team agreements have been in place in organizations for a long time, but I think they've evolved. And Liane, being an expert in teams, I want to start by asking Liane, what do you think's happening today with teams? Are we still negotiating agreements or have those gone by the wayside?
I think we're probably some teams are still officially negotiating agreements, but regardless of whether we are officially negotiating agreements or not, we are always negotiating. We are always, it's like parenting. You may have your official rules of the house, but every day you're renegotiating them in some way or another. So yeah, I think this is something that's ongoing.
Yeah. When we think about teams and finding ways to work together, what do you think? Is there a best practice at play here in terms of what should be discussed and a cadence for revisiting it, or is it something we have to do on the fly all the time? Like, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that people tend to do is start by negotiating about team dynamics issues. So, how we're going to have conflict, how we're going to collaborate with one another. And I don't think that's the right place to start at all, because it starts from personal preference. And I think the best place to start is actually by talking about what is our team here to do? What is our purpose?
Mhm.
I think in all of these conversations, at some point, I tend to stop and be like, you're being paid, right, to do a job, right?
Yeah.
So I tend to start there with here's what our organization is counting on us to do. Here's what our
Yes.
customers and our stakeholders need from us. So
Mhm.
to really get aligned first on the purpose of the team. From
Mhm.
there, often how you work flows. So you can get to, okay, well, if part of what we're trying to do is innovate and bring new products and new solutions to our customers, then our ways of working with one another probably are going to have more instances of diverging from one another, disagreeing, more of that healthy conflict. So it's not whether we start with, well, I don't like conflict, so let's agree to not
Right.
have conflict. It's
Mhm.
what does our job need us to do? So I always encourage people to start there. I do
Yeah.
think you asked about what's the cadence. I would say I would if there's anything that gives you a point where it's sort of a new team,
Mhm.
that's a great time to officially kind of say, okay, let's just revisit. If it's a new leader, you've had some new members, it's a new fiscal year. So any of those milestones make a great moment to revisit it sort of formally.
Mhm.
And then if something changes, if a certain topic comes up that causes people to violate some of the norms that you've set, that's another great point to say, let's just revisit this. So I think of the former, which is doing the official kind of ground rules, as kind of getting your immunization against team dysfunction. And then I think
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
ad hoc ones as every once in a while you need a bit of a booster shot.
Yeah, I love the analogy, especially in flu season. Well done. Um, I'm thinking that do you see organizations writing these down as much as they ought to, or really clearly articulating them so they're well understood, or are these kind of talked about and then kind of let go, and that's why we veer away from them, or do they become cornerstones if they're done well, so that you're always pointing back to what you've agreed to?
Yeah, I would say the organization that probably does it best in terms of codifying it and then having it be just in the language all day, every day is Amazon.
Mm,
So I've done lots of work with Amazon. They have their leadership principles. Anyone in the world can go on and see Amazon's leadership principles. And
mhm,
the language in those leadership principles comes up in conversation all the time. People
mhm.
stop and say, if we are going to, and then they'll name one of the what would we do here? So it is
Yes.
a lens that they're using all the time. I would say that would be a best case scenario version of it.
Mhm,
I think what you were mentioning is more common, which is we do some team building offsite at some hotel somewhere, and somebody writes them on a flip chart,
yeah.
and we break them within 2 days and never mention them again. That's probably more common.
Yeah.
So I think they are useful. It is worth codifying them, and it only works if then it becomes something that you're using
Yeah.
as a criteria for how you show up and how you make decisions every day.
Love that. Thank you for the Amazon example. Are they a top-down only thing, or is this something you can build together, do you think?
Yeah, I love both. So, Amazon, it's very top down. Like if you're being recruited to work there, you are expected to understand these and talk about how you're going to live them,
Mhm.
and they're non-negotiable. But at
Yeah.
the same time, when we work within a team, there may be other things that we want to layer on, and this
Mhm.
is where we get to understanding the individual humans that are part of your team. And if your team is small enough, if your team is 8 or 10 people, you can get to that point of understanding. For us, in our particular kind of work and who we are, here's some extra things we're going to add on that allow us to
Mhm.
do our job more effectively, that are optimized for who we are as people. So
Mhm.
I think a bottom up approach makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to bring in the concept of personal preference and where that plays in. So, if there's a bottom up piece,
Yeah,
who we are matters. And so, I created something I call the work style profile, which is it's a survey questionnaire essentially to complete to help people articulate what invites their great work,
yeah,
and then an option to be able to share that with others if they
yeah,
choose to, because
yeah,
privacy is needs to be
yeah, yeah,
respected.
yeah,
And Rajesh Ananda and I spoke to in the first series of this, created something called the Biodex. So, how do we start looking and integrating personal preference and also I'm going to bring up this sort of need for accommodation because I look at performance and I look at inclusive performance. So I'm
mhm,
looking at how do we get as many people, as much talent at the table as possible.
yeah,
And a lot of what's mandated at some point, I mean, we saw through the pandemic actually the greatest percentage of people with disabilities in the workforce ever because
mhm.
of the flexibility that was on offer.
Yeah, it was great.
And yeah, and sometimes top down, I haven't seen in any of the return to office mandates any discussion about inclusion, accessibility, disability. It's like, well, if there's a medical reason, and the medical reason is a pretty narrow view. There's also a social model of disability, which is a whole other topic, but it's looking at what barriers do people face. And when we start to have this conversation about what barriers are there, they may be temporary, situational. It may be time of life. It might be first trimester of pregnancy. It might, there's all kinds of things that come and go as well. Illnesses, situational medical treatments, all kinds of things. How does a leader manage this without dying from complexity, without being like, oh my gosh, this is too much? I think there's a lot of resistance because it seems daunting.
Yeah, it is daunting. I think it's a
Yeah.
lot, right? And it's often in uncomfortable subjects and
Yeah.
conversations that feel too intimate for the workplace, and so it's hard. Um, I would say if we go back to the premise from the very beginning of what I
Mhm.
said, which is
Mhm.
start with what the organization is counting on you to do.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really important piece. What is the organization counting on you to do in your role? What
Mhm.
outcomes do you need to deliver?
Mhm.
And, if you are able to deliver those outcomes that are critical in your role, the things you're being paid for,
Mhm.
then I think a manager should then give as much flexibility as possible in allowing
Right.
you to do that in a way that works for you. What I worry about is sometimes it goes the other way. It's like, well, this is what works for me. And if
Mm.
that ends up creating what the company needs, well, that's nice. But if not, too bad. And that the rigidity of that, it really has blown my mind through the Great Resignation kind of era of people
Yeah.
just feeling entitled. So, start with, here's what your role is here to accomplish, but
Yeah.
move to, help me understand some of those things that affect you. And so, learning more about people with attentional challenges who say, look,
Mhm.
we have an open office. It is
Mhm.
so hard for me. My brain is fried trying to do this.
Yeah.
You know, um, could I have a couple of days at home where I've created an environment that's really well
Mhm.
suited to my own attention?
Mhm.
When I'm here, would it be okay if I had a few hours where I can go into a room and sit in there and work? Those kinds of things.
Mhm. Mhm.
I had a great experience, a really illuminating experience during the pandemic where I was delivering some programs in executive education, and somebody wrote to me and said she's visually impaired and she has never felt more engaged in her work because everything is online now. So everybody
Yes.
was having to send their materials. So she
Yep.
was at home with all of her assistive technology,
Yeah.
and so she just felt she could be ready to ask great questions. And it was wonderful. So,
Yeah.
learning about that. So, I believe that for the most part, and you and I can debate this, I believe that you should be working toward, at least 80% of people being able to do their best work, be, optimized for them in delivering the kinds of things that the role needs to deliver.
Mhm.
But I do believe that there are some places where, while everybody deserves to have somewhere that they belong and can do their best work,
Mhm.
not every workplace can be that for every person. There are just
Yeah.
places where it's not a fit, right? But if we start with, here's what your role is here to do,
Yeah.
and within that, if you can achieve those outcomes as a manager, I'm going to just flex as much as I can
Yeah.
to, make that conducive to you, as long as it's, and we can come back to this as a separate point. But the other thing is, the other thing we have not done a good job of is managers have done a terrible job of defining what the outcomes are that a role is responsible for. So
Agree.
we've defined those things mostly as widget production.
Yeah.
And if all my job is producing widgets, I'm going to say a lot of people can do that more effectively from home,
Mhm.
right? You save time commuting. You're not in these open offices. You're saving about $7,000 a year
Yeah.
like, we can really optimize if widget production is all that we're trying to do.
Mhm.
But what managers haven't done is say it's not just about widget production. It's about how younger colleagues overhear you talking and learn
Mhm.
contextual information that's so important to them doing a good job. It's
Mhm.
about the innovative chocolate meets peanut butter ideas that happen when you come around a corner and bump into somebody. So I think that's another problem. So we've just put out a whole bunch of ideas there, but there's
Yeah.
the inclusiveness, there's the, how far should we go? And then I think there's also this part of, managers have really failed in their responsibility to help people understand your job is not just producing widgets. And that's why you
Yeah.
can't just stay at home all the time and optimize for your own widget production. There are
Yeah.
other things we have to think about as well.
Yeah. I love all of that, and I love the analogy of chocolate and peanut butter, and we're on the cusp of Halloween, so
Yes,
I'm all over
exactly.
that. I'm just going to pause for a second here and ask Raphael, do we have any questions, Raphael?
Not yet, but this is a good time to also remind everybody that this is Optimizing Productivity for All with Clare Kumar, Neuroinclusive Performance Strategist. Today we're talking about negotiating team agreements for how you work and how can leaders and their employees work together to co-create optimal and inclusive ways of working. Today we are with Liane Davey, and make sure to follow both Liane and Claire in Fishbowl so you don't miss any talks in the series. We really want to talk to you. We want to create a conversation. So keep that raise your hand button closed. And if you want to ask an anonymous question, you can text me through here and I'll read your question out loud without saying your name. To do that, step one, tap on my face. Step two, click the view profile button. And step three, click message. I'll repeat those instructions again. Step one, just tap on my face. Step 2, view profile button. And step 3, message.
All right. Thank you, Raphael. Yeah. So, Leanne, you raised a lot of amazing points there. And it actually links back to my own personal story where I ended up leaving the corporate world because I tried to negotiate that very flexibility that I needed to be successful. I've only recently been diagnosed as autistic this spring. And at that time, though, I didn't even have the words for high sensitivity. This is back in 2007, 2008. But I knew that with small children and my sensitivity to the commute, not even just being in the office, the commute sucked the life out of me. So by 9 o'clock, I was done already.
Yeah.
And I tried to negotiate for a job that was 90% on the phone. Okay, I'll come in 50% of the time and for any meeting that you need. And they said no. And I think there was a lot at play there. There was false consensus effect where we think that other people are going to work like we just like we do. I mean, you should have a pink background. Shouldn't you like pink as much as I do, Leanne? Come on. You know, so there was a lot at play there, but you're raising a point that I think deserves amplification here. And that is that leaders weren't really articulating or able to spell out or make concrete. Yes, my job objectives, my KPIs, key performance indicators were spelled out, but that unspoken, we also expect list was not until I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, I reached out to a senior leader and said, what was up with that decision? Because it made no sense to me. It made no sense to the work getting done. Oh, we wanted you for your mentoring.
Mm.
Did I hear the word mentor or
Yeah. Ever?
mentoring once
Once?
in the
Yeah.
year
No.
that I was there?
No.
Not
Yeah.
one time.
Yeah.
So I kind of call baloney
Yeah.
or bad execution, but nevertheless, there was no understanding of what expectation there was. And in most cases, I was working synergistically with people, but I had my own work to do. I didn't
Yeah.
go in and sit with a team and collaborate and connect. I was on the phone 90% of the time or in solo work.
Yeah.
So when we have mandates now that are looking at um, prescribing a certain way of working, how do we invite leaders to pedal back a little bit and yes, focus on the outcomes and look at that analytically? That's something I do in the total teamwork program is look at the tasks, that
Yeah.
people need to accomplish and include connection as one of the tasks, like
Right.
embedding connection. So
Yeah.
I want to expand on that, but how do leaders zoom out and start to look at the robust list of the things we're asking people to do that are unspoken?
Yeah. So, what the word that works for me in encouraging leaders is to talk about what are your expectations of people as members of a community.
Mm.
So that would be you're a member of a community in your team. What are the
Mhm.
expectations there? And then you're a member of a community as part of the broader organization. And what are the expectations there? Because it's not just, how are you a good organizational citizen yourself, your own behavior, your KPI production. It's
Mhm.
how are you making sure that you are a good, community member. And when you start to talk about that, they figure out the mentoring thing that they had never been able to put their finger on at first. They say,
Mhm.
well, these are the kinds of things that are also important. And it's not that hard. I guess the other big inhibiting factor is managers live in perennial fear of being called unfair. And I get really what's the right word? I don't know. It's a good way to get me being a little spicy when people talk about fair. And I basically come down to the point of saying, like, there's no such thing as fair. Fair is crap. Like, because in the workplace, you have, as a manager, you have one person yelling at you from one side that you did something differently for a different employee than you did for
Mhm.
them. So it's not fair because obviously in this specific instance, fairness is about consistency, and somebody else yelling in the other ear because you did the exact same thing for two people who are in very different situations. And in that case, obviously they're arguing for fairness as an equity based thing. So if the manager is freaking out over somebody's going to call me unfair, if I do something different for Claire, if I let her work from home
Mhm.
and I don't let somebody else work from home, if they're worried about being labeled as unfair, they're just
Mhm.
paralyzed and they can't
Yeah.
make good decisions. So I just say, let it go. So it's interesting. I was with a utility company yesterday, all the leaders of a big utility. And so this work from home came up. And they
Mhm.
said, we hear a lot from our folks who, string hydro lines that
Yeah.
they're envious of the people who can work from home. And it's not fair that they get to work from home. I said, well, that's very self-centered way of thinking about it, because
Mhm.
here's the great thing about stringing hydro lines is when your shift ends, you can't string a hydro line from home,
Mhm.
and you can't string a hydro line at 9 p.m. Well, you can, but not if once you've
Yeah.
gone home.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who works from home may look at you, the person stringing the hydro lines, think, I wish that I could
Mhm.
just stop at the end of my shift. And
Yeah.
these are the things managers they're afraid to talk about. They just avoid the conversation. They're like, you know what we need to go back to is, what's your role? What's the role you're being
Mhm.
paid for? What do you
Mhm.
have to accomplish? And within that, let's give you as much flexibility as we can to accomplish it in a way that works for you. But if your job is stringing hydro lines, that's going to look differently than if your job
Mhm.
is building performance management systems.
Yeah.
So I just see so many managers, probably in your case, I would be suspicious about the mentoring. I do think it's a bit of post hoc baloney going on there. Or maybe just way after the fact insight that they hadn't had at the time. But I think
Mm.
probably what it was is, you know what? I don't want to listen to everybody squawking that Claire gets to work from home and they don't. And if I let her, it's
Yeah.
the one foot on the banana peel thing. Like if I let her do it, then everybody's going to do it. And
Mhm.
they don't have the energy, they don't have the
Mhm.
skills, they just can't cope with that. And so they don't. They
Yeah.
just say it's easier to just say no.
Yeah, that might have been a play. My hypothesis, actually, the woman I was working for had no children, and her husband used to drop her off every morning at the office.
Sweet.
Sweet is
How
right.
do I
Sweet
get
is right.
this deal?
Exactly. So I think she had no real understanding of what it was like life with two small children and, an hour and a half of travel every morning to be able to show up in the office.
Yeah.
And her preference, and this is where I think this false consensus effect was. I remember, I still quote her, I can work anywhere. I can work on the back of a pizza box. I remember her saying that to me and I'm like, I can't work anywhere. I need a
Yeah.
little bit of quiet. I need light. I need also light. This was
Mhm.
another area. Oh my God. The first day I had told her before the interview, in the interview process, I have seasonal affective disorder. I need a lot of light. And I got to the office and I was put in a cubicle without even line of sight to a window, never mind being close to a window. And then I saw these open desks near the window. And I said, I'm going to be over there. And you can imagine it didn't go well. So we got off on the wrong foot. But it was, that spirit of granting flexibility where you can wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I come back and I look and I try and look at it with compassion and say, well, what did she need to make her job more comfortable? And I think this was before cell phones were rampant and everybody had them. I think it's easier for me to manage when I know where she is and I know what number to
Of
call.
course. Of
Right?
course.
And
Absolutely.
so I think that might be at play now too, as people say, especially older school leaders who are used to having that physical connection or the same number to dial. And they
Mhm.
just want it to be the same way, that please don't take the structure that gave me comfort in the way I'm operating and expect me to now deal in the abstract nature of time and people.
We're going back to the same problem though. I think that
Hmm.
problem, the like I like it when I can manage by walking around problem,
Hmm.
comes back to because managers are paying attention to the wrong things. They're paying attention to activity, not outcomes.
Yes.
So, I'm all over this topic lately. That there's three things a manager can pay attention to: your activity,
Yeah.
your outputs, or your outcomes. So your activity is just, are
Hmm.
you doing a lot of stuff? Your outputs are you producing things? Are you getting to the deliverable stage? And your
Yeah.
outcomes is, are you making the changes in the world that your role is there to make?
Yeah.
Now, the problem is managers and the group I was with yesterday, I actually forced them to define what are the outcomes that you want your people to be accountable for. And it was
Hmm.
hard to get it into that language. But once they did,
Mm.
it was great. And then we could say, all right, so then what are the outputs that they can create that make that more likely? And what are the activities? But if
Yes.
you are
Yeah.
paying attention, if you haven't figured out what outcomes you need,
Yeah.
then it's easier for you to just pay attention to your person's activity. And you can only do that if you can see them. If you can't
Yeah.
see them, like I forget the Microsoft number. It's like 85% of managers question whether their employees are actually being productive when they're working from home. It's some huge paranoid number. Like, well, that's only because those managers are measuring activity,
Mhm.
not outcomes. It should be incredibly
Mhm.
clear whether they're getting outcomes or not, regardless of where they're sitting. So,
Mhm.
until managers can make this progress to understanding what are the outcomes this role needs to create,
Mhm.
until that, we're going to see them wanting this. I want to see you. I want to know you're working hard. I want to walk by your computer and make sure there's no free cell on it. It's all activity based
Yeah.
because
I need you to look busy.
yeah, exactly. And it's
Yeah.
just, it's unfortunately this attention on activity is reducing our productivity, not increasing it,
Mhm.
and increasing our stress levels and
Yeah.
increasing the amount of burnout. We are focused on the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a big overlap between managers who focus on activity and managers who are rigid about return to office and ways of working.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. This is another great time to check in with Raphael. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we have one from me actually.
Oh,
So
go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah.
Raphael. Welcome. Yes,
Um,
please ask.
okay, so a little bit of context to Liane and to everyone listening. I'm from Venezuela, and here in Venezuela, different from other countries, we have a goal-based work. Like I've never known what it is to charge per hour. And when I started working with Claire and when I started working abroad, I realized that you work with time, you do a time based shift. The thing is, and that's something that has happened, and not with Claire, but it has happened before. Like, how do we create a balance between the activity that you do and the outcome if we have these two variants? When I work by goal, and that's something that used to happen here in Venezuela, if I had a job that had a goal based work, I was going to be punished with overwork and it will lead me to burnout. But when I transition into charging per hour, and I am usually a fast worker, I'm being punished with low payment. Like, how do we find a balance between that?
Oh, you're punished with more work.
Oh,
Like, please. Oh, you did that fast? I've got more
yeah.
for you.
So, conclusion, I just quit. Like, no.
Yeah, I think it's about understanding the work, and that takes some good thinking, right? So, goal-based work makes a ton of sense. Where it doesn't make sense is if it's something very new, something where there's a lot of ambiguity, something where the person may have to invest a tremendous amount of time to get the outcome, and so the rewards aren't commensurate with how much effort they've put in. And so in that case, I think you want to leave a little bit more room for, negotiating how much is reasonable. I'm not a fan of just paying people for their time, because I think that leads us to this sort of activity based. And if I would be so petrified to understand how much of the salary we're paying everybody in the world right now is just for responding to emails. So, I saw one piece of research out of the University of Ottawa that the average person's doing 11 hours of email a week, but that's got to be low for a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
So, this is just wow, we are paying people to not do anything that is good for our customers, do anything that is moving the needle. We're just really, you know, pushing a rock around. Like, it's really interesting. So, I would say, for the most part, err on the side of rewarding outcomes, but yeah, making sure that it's reasonable and that we understand in certain circumstances that getting those outcomes may take more effort uh, than than other times.
Yeah, I think you raise a lovely point too, though, around the work and the time that we have to spend to be responsive and to be responsive to, or maybe even to send four emails because somebody didn't respond and to text them and that like the busy work of communication. And
Horrible.
also the fact that because of security, we are now asked to multi-factor authenticate. And I don't know if we have actually measured the GDP hit that security is driving. And nobody's quantifying any value attained out of that. So I think there's been a continued erosion of our ability to actually spend time on meaningful tasks
Yeah, for sure
because
there
of the
has.
complexity. Oh. Oh, that's a fire alarm. I'm going to mute me so you don't have to hear it. Can you hear that?
It just once. Now I can't.
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, let's cross your fingers for me, folks. Otherwise, I'm going to be over to Liane and Raphael to have a fabulous conversation. But while I have the floor, and hopefully this fire alarm doesn't go off again, I do want to ask here. I see Shala, I see Carlos and Lincoln, Andy, Tiara, Monica, Celeste. We've got a great crew here. Do you have a question for Liane? You can tell listening to her. She's an insightful voice, pushing organizations to think more creatively, to dig deeper into what they're asking of their employees. What questions do you have for Liane that can help you with your teams and negotiating how you work? Are any of you struggling with a return to office mandate? Are any of you struggling with someone who doesn't have the courage to give you what you need to be most productive? What kind of challenges are you facing? Liane and I are here to respond to you. So please, 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 please raise your hand. Or, as Raphael said, press on his face, squish it, and then see the DM, the ability to send him a message, and he will ask a question for you. Just as he asked his own now, he can ask a question for you.
We love the "I have a friend" questions.
Yeah,
I have
asking
a
asking
friend.
for a
Asking for a
friend,
friend.
asking for a friend. Yeah, I love, Liane, that you raised this concept of fairness, and you mentioned 80%. And as someone with a couple of hidden challenges and who lacked language to talk about them
Mm.
beforehand, I know there's a lot of reticence to have conversations, meaningful conversations about, gosh, this would really help me if. There's a lack of psychological safety in the workplace, as well as
Mhm.
what I call neurological safety with open concept offices and
Mhm.
and complex environments and emotional contagion. And um, but I think it's really, really important for leaders to be able to come to understanding what one individual person might need, and to be able to come to it without fearing this need to give everybody everything,
Right.
without fearing that it's going to be very expensive. A lot of the adjustments that people ask to make are about flexibility. And they might be simple things. Like I interviewed Dr. Loran Starr recently on the podcast, and she's dyslexic. And would you know, she didn't realize until she got to college, A, that she was dyslexic, but B, that she had trouble reading when text was printed on white paper.
Mm.
When it changed to blue or green, all of a sudden, woohoo,
Yeah.
top student, she could read. And so, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and
Mhm.
simple, simple things. So, my invitation is for leaders to not look for a percentage to aim for, but to be brave enough to be in conversation to say, what do you need to succeed?
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think, like, I can agree with that and say
Mhm.
at some level overall, the answer is not going to be 100%. There are going
Mhm.
to be people and situations where the best answer is this is too costly a fit, too
Yeah.
costly for the organization, for the
Mm.
team, for the manager, or for the individual themselves, right?
Yep.
And so, we're not going to get to 100%. But, I fully endorse the idea that managers should be having these conversations, asking that question,
Mhm.
and that individuals need to take ownership of their own needs. So if you aren't comfortable telling your manager,
Mhm.
expecting them to have ESP and to read your mind and to know something you're not willing to advocate for, that's an unreasonable expectation.
Mhm.
It's perfectly reasonable to say, is there an employee resource group or a place where I can get some help as to how to talk about this with my manager or
Mhm.
any of those things? I think, particularly in larger organizations, it's
Mhm.
wonderful that we have more and more of these things and more support. But it's hard, and we have to
Yeah.
get better at it without
Yeah.
expecting that every employee or every human is going to be a fit for every team. It's just
Well,
not the
yeah,
case, right?
absolutely. We have capacity, we have capability,
Yeah.
and we have job expectations and job requirements. So
Yeah.
there does have to be a fit. The other thing, as a productivity coach, I've often tried to impart to leaders I talk to is that human capacity is not static. So
Yeah,
we're
that's
not
so true.
programming we're not programming robots.
Yeah.
So, stuff happens. My
Yeah.
my basement flooded while I was pregnant and my nanny quit. I
Yeah.
can tell you my capacity was
It's a bad
under
week.
threat, right? Because
Yeah, that's
the
a bad week.
renovations, of course, fell onto my shoulders. And so I remember I asked for an advanced mat leave. This is back in Montreal. And my then VP flew in. He was in Montreal in business. He's like, can we have lunch? I'm like, absolutely, let's have lunch. And he said, I remember, I wanted to see if you were bug-eyed, stressed out. I wanted, seriously. Oh, he said other things in that call I won't repeat. But he wanted to come and check in. Like, how are you? He saw me as I want to bring you into the leadership team, and he wanted to know what was going on. And I think that kind of curiosity and understanding, rather than assuming, oh, she can't handle things. Well, I don't know how many people can handle being 6 months pregnant and then quitting and the
Yeah.
basement flooding. Like
Right.
it's a lot,
That's
right?
a lot. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So I think this act of curiosity and being being okay to stand in curiosity is super important. So I do want to flag a couple of former Fishbowl Live interactions that we had. We had one in the spring, Northern Hemisphere spring. So this was in between April and June, and it was speaking up for what you need.
Yeah.
You can find that on clarekumar.com/fishbowl live. You'll see that. And also, we just recently did another one, speaking up for what you need, part two, because we know it's so hard to have these conversations. And
Yeah.
that's what the work style profile is about. And this is, I love your thoughts on this, Liane. What I do in the Total Teamwork program is I have everybody go through this work style profile beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
They come to the Total Teamwork session, which was live and in person the way we did it. You could do it virtually, but you bring people together synchronously in time. And everybody there has actually interviewed somebody else to learn about what they need. And they come to that meeting with two things. They come in with a full understanding and ability to introduce somebody else, but they also come in with an analysis of their key tasks, what they need to do, and what needs to be done together. And that includes the team building portion. Right.
Right.
So they come in with, oh gosh, I have a better understanding. We get to in the in-person thing, a better understanding of who everybody is on the team. And it's stuff people are not talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For
Nobody
sure.
knows the guy who likes to, in production. This is what a team I worked with, and it's a production team. One guy likes to have the music on, and he's like, boom, boom, this helps me think. And the other person is, I need complete quiet. So these are the things we're not talking about that the Total Teamwork program is there to do, to help move to compassion infused compromise, and say that it's actually not that complex if we start to understand each other. To your point, focus on what the outcomes need to be,
Mm-hmm.
and just strive to better understand each other. But I don't think anybody's making time for that right now. And
Not many for sure.
yeah,
We're mostly like sitting in grievance and being annoyed that, that person is playing their music. And it's like,
yeah,
well, did they have any idea that that's a problem for you? Like,
yeah.
no, I was just hoping if I gave them the stink eye for 2 months and whatever, they'd finally figure it out. Excellent. Excellent. That's highly likely to work.
Yeah, it's and this is the conflict part. We anticipate and then we don't. We just we just
So
seethe. We
one of the
just seethe,
things
right?
a new thing I've been working on 5 years after writing the book on conflict. I finally have started talking about conflict as a verb. It's an action, and
Mhm.
grievance as the noun, the standstill thing. And so, people say there's so much conflict in the world. I'm like, no, I actually think there's very little conflict in our workplace. There's very little active, I am working through this, and there's a
Yes.
ton of grievance. I am
Yes.
sitting in my spot, feeling
Yeah.
aggrieved, feeling bitter. So once I kind of got clear for myself the difference between grievance and conflict, I was like,
Mm.
oh, this is the problem. Tons of
Yeah.
grievance,
We're
not
not
enough,
stepping into the
not enough conflict.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think right. And I think your book, The Good Fight, was an invitation to look at it positively, to kind of invite people to come to it.
Yeah.
So, but
Well,
it's,
because you got to
grievance is
get to the other
comfy.
side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, grievance is grievance comfy because we're used to it. But we're not, and conflict requires some bravery, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah. Yeah.
requires some, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
grievance is self-righteousness, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm so right about this. Knowing only my truth, I am so
Yes.
right, right? Conflict is,
Yes.
oh, now I also know your truth, and oh, it's more complicated. But that takes bravery.
Well, and I love your connection to, if we're thinking about outcomes, it was sort of, to me, I'm hearing why are we doing this? There's a connection to why is it important as a team. And
Mhm.
if you can start to connect to a bigger idea, you
Mhm.
can transcend some of the things that are easy compromises to make. And if there's a big compromise you're being asked to make, then it's worth having a conversation about to understand, right?
Yeah, I think this goes back to something else that I tell leaders all the time. The most important questions leaders should be answering are why questions.
Hmm.
Um, the conversations and the questions that are a shared responsibility between managers and individual contributors are the what questions. And the things managers should be getting the heck out of the way on are answering the how questions. So if you think about it that way, um,
Yes.
like how, where, when, using what software, or like whatever else, um,
Yeah.
just get out of the way.
Yeah.
If you have made sure that they are very clear on why, like here's the
Yeah.
outcome we're looking for, and you've together come to a mutual agreement about what you think are the outputs that are most likely to lead to that outcome,
Yeah.
get out of the way on the how. Like
Yeah.
let your folks find their how in a way that works for them.
Yeah.
Your value add as a manager is not in figuring out the how for them. It is absolutely in doing a great job of defining the why
Yeah.
and then making sure they're clear on the what.
Yeah.
But too much
Yeah.
time of managers mucking about answering how questions.
I saw a recent post on LinkedIn about Amazon senior leadership talking about our leaders. We're going to support our leaders through this. And I'm like, your leaders are going to need support because they may being asked to dip into this how when they know they have no place,
Right. Oh
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's rough. It's really rough. I don't get the 5 day a week thing. Um, I don't think I do believe in return to office. I do believe that there is a lot that happens contextually, collaboratively, innovation wise that happens better in the office. But I'm definitely not a 5 day a week person because the way that work has evolved and the way that offices evolved, offices are not conducive to productivity anymore on the vast majority of things. So we should be
Correct.
using office days really to heighten collaboration, connection, innovation, those sorts of things.
Hmm.
And we should be using days where people have more flexibility to choose where are they most productive. Now, some people are going to be more productive in an office. Who knows
Hmm.
what's going on in their home, right? Like, please get me out of there.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's the more interesting focus is what is the pie chart of your job in terms of
Mhm.
collaboration, innovation,
Yeah.
production, all those sorts of things?
Yeah.
And then, how do we have that happening in an environment and in a context that's most conducive to that function?
I love that. I want to come back now. I'm just looking at the time here. We've got 13 minutes left. So, folks, if you're listening and you have a question, don't wait. Now, this is your moment to have to come on stage. We don't bite. You can tell we're loving talking to each other. Leanne's ideas are forward thinking and so easy to share. So I hope you're definitely taking some notes and thoughts you can take back. But if you have a question, now's a wonderful time to ask it. Raphael, are there any anonymous questions that you'd like to bring forward?
Not at the moment, Claire.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So maybe Leanne, could you shed a little light going back to this utility that you worked with?
Mhm.
And that it was difficult to have them reverse engineer from activity to outputs to outcomes. Can you
Mhm.
talk about that outputs, which I think a lot of people are comfortable with,
Yeah.
that output to outcome piece? Can you
Yeah.
shed a little bit of light on how you worked some magic there?
So let's take a generic one, which isn't necessarily one from yesterday, although it did come up yesterday.
Mhm.
So one of the things that probably everyone on the call can relate to is creating reports, producing reports. We have become enamored with reports. And that's an output.
Mhm.
So I created this report. It took me four different systems. I had to go into our Salesforce and I had to go into our ServiceNow and I had to like whatever, our NetSuite and our whatever, and then with some pivot table magic. And so those are all the activities. And when
Yeah.
I did that, and then I was able to compare and contrast and blah, 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 I generated a report. Awesome. That is an
Did you
output.
frame it? Did you frame it? Put it. Woo.
um, but here's the question. Did that report change any behavior.
Mm.
Is anyone in the company doing anything differently after the report? That's an outcome. Another one that's hot with a client of mine right now. The marketing department has been very excited to tell us how they have grown the pipeline by 180%. Excellent. That's, they've done a whole bunch of campaigns, they've done a whole bunch of stuff, and it's grown the pipeline by 180%. But sales have gone up 0. And so the question is, well, was the key thing that you launched a bunch of new marketing campaigns, or was the key thing that the customers signed more contracts?
Yeah.
So an output is a work product,
Mm-hmm.
and an outcome is like a business change. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I would say is that we are often rewarding people and paying attention to people's productivity, so how many
Mm-hmm.
outputs they create, and ignoring their effectiveness, which is,
Mm-hmm.
do those outputs create the changes we're looking for? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's some of the reason why we're just doing so many things, feeling like we have to be accountable for 10 different things at once, having
Mm-hmm.
activities that take us well past the workday and into the weekend, all of it because we're doing a bunch of stuff that isn't actually driving the outcomes we need. Well, first of all, we're not really sure what the outcomes are. We aren't
Mm-hmm.
doing the work to understand if the outputs are driving the outcomes. So,
Mm-hmm.
an output is, it's good that you actually get past activity, get through the emails, get out of the meetings, and actually create something tangible. But at the same
Oh,
time, I would,
I think. Oh, hang on. We just lost. We just lost Leanne. We lost Raphael as well. So I can see that I'm still with you. I hope I'm still with you here.
Yes, Claire, you're
you
Valentina, what do you
are.
see? I am all right.
I
Okay,
only see
so
you. I don't see Liane or Raphael. So if they're
okay,
still in the room on their end, all they have
yeah.
to do is press leave quietly and then come back into the link.
They're trying to rejoin. So this is why just so folks know, we have a Zoom back channel going so we can see each other as we're
Okay.
doing this. So
Can you hear me?
yes, I
There we
can hear
go.
you now. You're back, Leanne, and
Yep.
Raphael. We lost him as well. So I know he'll be trying to rejoin as well. So welcome back. And this
Sorry
is
about
why
that.
we have the Zoom. So I could like wave
Yeah,
at Leanne because
that
she
was
wouldn't have
good.
known. She would have been talking
Nope.
away.
Looks like looks like everybody was still here. I was still in the room. So,
Exactly. So the Zoom back channel saved us. And just for
yeah.
those of you who want to know, we are hosting a Zoom after party where we hang out for just 15 minutes after the call, but in the Zoom room. So if you haven't asked a question now, you're welcome to join us in the Zoom room. But what you have to do is sign up for the next one at happyspace.hottopics.com. If you do want to join the Zoom room now, you can ask Raphael in the DMs, and I bet you he can grab the link and send it to you, and you can join us here. But sign up for happyspace.hottopics.com, and you'll find out the next in the Fishbowl live series and whatever we do with Hot Topics going forward. That's the place to stay in touch with a small community of people who are really interested in this intersection of productivity and inclusivity. And Leanne, to talk to your point, productivity, I've even started to refer to myself as a performance strategist now because productivity is too much about widgets
Yeah.
and running on a hamster wheel, and I'm like,
Yeah.
cringe. I'm all about taking a nap in the middle
Right.
of the afternoon so that you can
Right.
sustain your performance, and it's all about well-being and outcomes, positive outcomes, which means that
Right.
you're taking care of yourself and you're doing great things in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, so productivity, I'm not as even as much of a fan
No.
of this thing that I've been
No.
talking about for 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think if we keep paying attention to productivity, we miss effectiveness.
Yes.
And I would rather have an employee who takes 3 naps a day, but, signs more million-dollar contracts than an
Yeah.
employee who works 14 hours a day, has
Yeah.
100 customer meetings, but still hasn't signed any deals, right?
Right.
We need to get off of hustle porn. We need to get off of the productivity treadmill, and we have to actually start focusing on, if we could do fewer things and
Right.
get better outcomes, that would be good for all of us.
That's the elegant mind. My son is one of these minds. He's brilliant. I think he needs a shirt that says, "How little can I do?" And you want that brain on your team. I can
Yes.
tell you.
Yes.
This is a simple example. When we were, I was parenting, and and I was organizing people's homes and closets, and I have a product for folding clothes. I was into laundry big time. And he was like, well, first of all, tried living out of a laundry basket, which didn't go so well. I'm like, try it, see how it works. Didn't work. But he would take his shirts off and they would be inside out, and they would be inside out, hung up in the closet because hanging was easier for him than folding. Totally like, do it. I'm out
Yep.
of the house. Like, leader mom, back
Yeah.
off. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a film crew come over and film the closet, and they're like, "Are you okay with like the shirts being inside out?" I said, "The guy is genius. He
Yeah.
would take a shirt that was inside out and figure out how to flip it as he put it on."
Yeah.
I'm like, you
Exactly.
know what? You want those kinds of brains. So
Right.
we want these different brains. And what one of the big things that I'm concerned about in the world is that we keep designing out the sensitive people, the people can think deeply, the people that are neurodivergent or think, wired differently.
Hmm.
And we need more of this leadership flexibility. And we
Hmm.
need people to think they do need to listen. They do need to pay attention, because a lot of times they're inviting people out. They're
Yeah.
designing them out. And so we've got this is what my work is all about, anchoring in performance. So I'm
Hmm.
hoping, organizations will be listening and saying, "Oh, I do want to get the best out of my people, and I didn't know I was unintentionally squandering the
Yeah.
talent," right? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Oh, we have a raised hand. I see Nicholas. I'm going to invite you. Oh, you're here. Great, Nicholas. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining.
Hi, thank you for having me up. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. What would you like to share?
Oh, more of just a story and the last little bit about neurodivergency and kind of keying into people's strong suits really resonated strongly with me. I got fired from a company mm, probably like 7 months
Mm,
ago, and that was like a huge thing for me where they chose certain processes over actual use that I had. Like, they didn't treat me as an asset, they treated me as a liability. And they put me on a performance plan because simply I was not meeting the certain expectations that they wanted within the
mhm,
team. Even though I was coming in and told initially, like, oh, we love that, we love people who come in and have like a lot of different ideas. We want to hear those ideas, especially if they're critical. And then I come in and give them some critical ideas, and they're like, "Wait a minute, that's too many critical ideas. You need to take a back seat now."
You went over the
So
threshold of ideas, did you?
I
yeah,
I always
yeah,
think of this in like organ donation terms, right? So you are literally, your life is at risk without this new organ. So you finally get this precious life-saving thing, and then everything in your body rejects it. I find that's very common. Like, they wanted your new ideas, they wanted your new thinking, and then the minute you brought it, the whole like the whole body just rejected you.
yeah, exactly. It was a bit disappointing because I thought I had a lot to
Mhm.
offer, but simply there were just people on the team that were raising too many flags about the way I was operating, and I almost feel like um, team dynamic is really important in finding kind of like your niche within the team. If you can't gel well with them, then already at that point, like, it's just a failing team.
It can be. Leanne, do you have a thought or maybe an encouragement?
I think it's somebody put a comment on one of my YouTube videos yesterday about this as well. Like, they took a job that was kind of below their level, hoping they could progress, and they've just been through a few meetings where it's very clear the manager is kind of nasty
Mm,
and focused on the wrong things, and so they were asking my advice. And I think Nicholas is right. The way humans work, when these first impressions don't go well, it's so hard to change
mhm,
them. Now, like, I would try. I would try a very vulnerable reset. My understanding was that it's my questions and my different ways of thinking that are why I'm here. But I'd love some feedback about how they're landing with you. If I've got off on the wrong foot, I'd love an opportunity to understand and to,
mhm.
right? So you can try, but at the same time, I'm such a proponent of mental health that at some point, if you can't change your team, you have to change your team because we just cannot leave ourselves in the situation of chronic stress in a toxic environment for us.
Mhm.
And a toxic environment for us as an individual is not necessarily a toxic environment, period, end of sentence. It just might be toxic for us. So I think there are things you can try. I have tons of things on lianedavey.com that give you the language and the tools to try and make it better, or to hit reset if you got off to a bad start. But at some point, if it's just not happening, if people can't change their first impressions, I think you have to be very protective of yourself and your mental health and your ability to connect and not get isolated. And so at some point, it probably makes sense to find a place that's a better fit.
Thanks so much for that, Liane, and thank you to you, Nicholas, for sharing a difficult situation. I really encourage you to anchor in your strengths and look for that better fit going forward. And I want to thank everybody who joined today. We're at the top of the hour now, and the hour flew by as far as I'm concerned. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation. Please check out clarekumar.com/Fishbowl Live. Claire is with no third I joke, Clare, and Kumar as in Harold and Kumar, the movie. So clarekumar.com/Fishbowl Live. And you'll see links to lianedavey.com, and you'll see links to the workstyle profile and total teamwork programs as well. Both Liane and I are here to help make work better and teams more fun. So thank you so much for joining me, Liane, today, and for all of you for your time and attention today. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.